Hi, David.
Hi, Sarah.
I want to explore a topic this week about how people create change. There are so many books, and especially since neuroscience became a bit of a thing, that are
hmm
teaching people how to change their mindsets. And what I see is people working really, really hard to try to change the way they think. But from my perspective, it's an extremely hard work way of doing things. If not simply because if your mind is the bit that's kind of wonky, trying to use a wonky mind to fix a wonky mind is not actually going to be a very good strategy. So I thought we could talk about the perspective of energy in relation to personal transformation and what are alternatives. Well, first of all, why does using your mind make it such hard work, and what how can we do it better? It's a big topic.
Okay, so it's quite a big. This is really a large topic. So we'll just get a little bit out of the road first off. So what we also have to understand is that when we think of our mind, we also need to think about processing information. Yeah. And when we think of processing information, we only think of just the head, basically, because, well, that's what our brain does. But we
That's
also
what most
have,
people do, isn't it?
yeah,
That's entirely how they process. I noticed that. Yeah.
and there was something that I found out like ages ago, and it had a pretty big, significant impact on me. And luckily, it was a long time ago. So we often think that we only use like a small component of our brain. Yeah,
That's what they say.
it's more that's as they say. So we'll go with the given. Okay,
Yeah. Five.
whatever they
They taught
reckon.
me 5% at school. They said you only use 5% of your brain.
Okay, so we'll go with that. But instead of thinking about we only use 5% of your brain, what I'd like to say is that we only actually use a small percentage of our consciousness, our perception, how we process information, so that we can actually change that capacity so that instead of using 5%, it's a lot greater percentage.
And just as a tiny reflection on that, what I realize is when you change perception, for example, that's an instantaneous change which is extraordinarily powerful. The same with consciousness. What was the other one you mentioned?
Um,
Oh,
so how we process.
oh, process, how we process information.
Yeah,
If we process information with more than just this, that's
yeah.
also a very different experience. So,
It
okay,
is
you've got my
because a lot of
curiosity.
our info, yeah. So a lot of our information, first off, it tends to be very emotion, feelings, sort of driven, because
And
we're
thoughts.
and thoughts, yeah, because well, naturally, yeah, but then that's like before we even have the thought,
Yep, yep.
because of the way our processes work, and it means that when we have certain emotions, certain feelings, we only open ourselves to experience a certain thought pattern. So when you're only going to, it's the way your receptors work, and it's the way your processes work. So you only pick up different increments of information that you're going to actually use to process and then have a thought.
Can
Well, that's
I, uh, I need to ask a question there. Like,
yeah.
what are our processes and what are our receptors and where
Okay,
are
so we
they?
need.
Like, what's all
Okay,
that?
so um, very early on, when we do a healing with somebody, and when I look through somebody, as I say, they look like they're a barcode, and they have all these different areas of areas where they aren't working. Okay, so as soon as we hit a barcode, that is where somebody's energy simply is not working. Okay, it also means they aren't getting a certain type of perception. They aren't analyzing certain data. They aren't analyzing certain senses. So it's like as I say, often we have this, so we have very little peripheral view in a way. So it's like, as soon as we feel a little bit stressed, because most of us work on sound vibrations to start with, frequencies, tones, and harmonics. That's basically how we were sort of taught. But which means that these, we get interference a lot from all different types of vibrations, frequencies, tones, and harmonics, which automatically means that the range that we use comes in and goes out all the time. So when we're feeling really comfortable, our range opens up and we're open to lots of different perceptions. We also then use a lot of different types of consciousness at the same time. We feel more confident because we're using all these different types of vibrations, frequencies, tones, and harmonics, and we're getting balances at the same time. So we aren't. This also means that at the same time, we'll use both sides of our body, because as soon as we start to get a little bit of interference sometimes, be it from one sex or another, or the strangest thing is that a lot of people don't realize they have a lot of hereditary spirit connected to them. And that spirit actually closes down or shuts down a lot of people's information. As soon as they sense that, they're not fully aware of it, because most people are just focusing on the physical sounds and vibration, frequency, tones, and harmonics, which means that you don't even register quite often that you're being shut down, but you are at the same time being shut down, which means that you only experience this very short wave of frequencies and tones, and which means that people can be saying something and you hear it, but it doesn't register. It's like goes in one ear and out the other, because it's like you're being totally anxious. It's like you are starting to feel anxiety, you're starting to feel stressed, and then all of a sudden, what you process is absolutely totally diminished. So you could try and say, well, you should learn how to think and be more liberal and loosen up. But there's no way that that's going to happen, because the cycles of your energy, as soon as you get into certain cycles, you shut down. And it's basically hereditary in some cases. So you try and think differently. So as soon as we go through and we find all these different components that sit in your body, the energy of your body opens up, which means that you're more receptive to sense certain loads of information, whereas before you weren't actually open to receiving that information. It was completely turned off.
So does that mean the receptors and processes are kind of senses that we have in our energy?
Yeah. So if we go back, we have to even go back even before that, because we've talked about this just a little bit in how energy comes in and energy goes out. And it's amazing how many sensories, and they look like hair, basically, when I look at them, and they can go out a long way. So people's senses are all sticking out here instead of being them inside them. So it's senses of certain things, okay? All different analogies of what demographics of things. So when they're sitting outside, when somebody is quite forceful, over serious, and you feel all these stresses come on a person even before they've said something. They don't even, like, certain people are ultra forceful, yeah, with their energy. So as soon as your senses feel all this stuff, we almost go, we're like cat on a hot tin roof. It's like, ah! And we bring in, so we delete all sorts of senses, reactions and responses that we're getting all the time, and we will cut down off certain receptors. that tell us what's really going on. So it's like we're really working on a very diminished scope, if you like, of
So it's
what's
not five.
available.
It's not 5% of the brain. It's 5% of our receptivity that we're working
It
on.
is. It is. And so once we learn to, one, change our energy so it's not um, compatible more to everybody else's energy, and we bring all these components back in and we're more contained, then we don't react and respond to others. We more react to ourselves. So we then, instead of reacting to everybody else, excuse me, straight away, all the different conversations that are going on, you're registering. So as you register vast amounts more of information, then all of a sudden you're starting to then register, then process lots and lots of different information, because our bodies aren't the only place that have receptors. Like, all our head everywhere has all these receptors. So
Do we have them around us? I feel that I
yeah, they
sense
are. Yeah.
with around me, not only in me, so to speak.
That's correct. So as we change this formula and our senses become more functional and our receptors and processes, so because we have like little mini processes all the way through our body before it even gets to the head, yeah, otherwise it won't accept the information. So I'm not sure that science really actually agrees
Well,
with that.
actually, yeah, funnily enough, I know and I've experienced, and I think that it is in science, and I'm not scientific enough to know where it is, but we receive information before it registers in our brain.
Yeah, we do.
And I know that, and I see that in people. It's like you can literally see them receive some energy or some information, and
Mm.
afterwards they think about it, or you can literally see when the brain gets it, and it's afterwards. And I know that that is a thing. I'm sorry to be so unscientific in my description of it.
Well, and actually, honestly, one of my clients even this morning, we had that. It was the same. It was the same thing, and this lady who was incredible sensitive, but is absolutely crazily creative. She was telling me how she didn't feel quite so happy, and I said, "Okay, well, we've got a lot of things we're going to change," and it's so interesting because as soon as you change the amount of information that that person can receive, instead of not being able to receive it, her face honestly was smiling for an hour.
Well, and I see the same
And it's
thing when
incredible.
when we get a very narrow focus and we're just focusing on
Mm.
something very small, we can get drawn into it and we feel so tight and tense. And when we open our perception and we can do that, immediately you feel peace, you feel expansive, and then naturally you feel happy. Like it's a complete mood changer to open your perception or to open what you're receptive to. There are different aspects of that.
It is, and as we've all experienced with clients, like all of a sudden, people become, you get more confident, but it's self truth that you're finding because you have so much information that yourself is actually telling yourself. I mean, a lot of people say it's self love too, but it is actually self truth because you're quantifying what is actually going on in your life. So you have that confidence then to shift. You're not going with the same old small formula of trying to get an answer all the time, because that's never going to. And when you've got this narrow perspective, you're never going to be able to have a wide enough variance of information to solve or problem solve. And it's not about learning. It's about problem solving,
Yep.
because that's the total difference. It's not a
Well, if you
matter
can
of
solve
just,
problem, if you can solve problems, you have peace in your life.
you do.
Doesn't it just is such a practical thing. You can solve problems if you can also, achieve the challenges you set for yourself, which is usually solving a whole lot more problems. Then there's really nothing to be afraid of. It just takes out so much of that insecurity and lack of confidence, doesn't it?
It does. And like, instead of you being hesitant about problem solving becomes a joy.
Yep.
And then you actually, it's not like you go looking for problems or that either. It's just like when they're there, it's just, you can see all the different patterns, and it's like all of a sudden you say, well, okay, there it is there. That's where it is. I only need to change this. It's not a big deal. We don't get dramatized either.
So that's the advantage of being able to process with much more of you rather than processing on a very small percentage of your capability, is because then you're able to, at a subtle level, assess way more information in a single take, in a single perception, so to speak, and then you can immediately go to the root of the problem, for example. Whereas if you're looking here and the problem's over there, you're actually just going to miss it.
One of the biggest things too, Sarah, as we've all noticed, is like, because we're able to focus on what is our own information and what is others' information. And that's the biggest thing, because if you have your information and you're collating information that's being bombarded from outside you, then sometimes you can't actually focus on what is yours and what's not, because instead of, although we are a complex body and we're able to use that complexity quite easily once we learn all different ways of using all our energies, conscious and consciousness, it means that you're not dragging in all this stuff that has absolutely nothing to do with us, and that's where all the drama comes from. So it's like you're able to be responsible for your own information. So you don't need to be responsible for all this information that's bombarding you all around the place, which really doesn't help you solve anything. It's just crap in 9 times. Yeah, it's just, yeah, it is. And it is, and it has nothing to do with us. So we don't need to waste our time doing all this extra processing, and our receptors going crazy trying to figure out what's what. All of a sudden we go, okay, that information there relates to me. The rest is just clutter, and we don't need to worry about it. So you just focus on that. All of a sudden, your mindset can then deal with quite a lot of new information, which means you can problem solve and get to the actual answer. So
let's talk a bit about problem solving, because if you think about people who are trying to change their mindset, which is where we started, or trying to fix up something in their life, as you said, all they're really doing is trying to solve a problem.
that's right.
So what is really the mechanism for problem solving at an energetic level?
Okay, so we'll go back to talking about how I see people, how they've got all these lines and they just look like a bar graph or whatever you want to call them. Because obviously everyone's not listening to all these in sequence. So when I look and I see everyone looks like a barcode, as we go down and we get a part of somebody where the information just looks like a line and it's not really working, I know that line just isn't working, it's non-functional. Where you find non-functionality, that's where people are going on and they're doing all this recycling of all the problems that they have, okay? Not just a problem, it's like every problem, all the dramas, all the things that are going on, it's just drama, because you can't problem solve, because you can't get the whole energy to move through the whole body, to go through all these different receptors, all these different types of processes, so that you can get all the needed information and get all the needed consciousness, because we are made up of a whole collective consciousness. And if you think all the consciousness is in your head, well, you're saying that your consciousness is the only part that matters. And all this from down here doesn't matter. So you're just like one of those heads in Fantasia where you see Richard Nixon's head in a bottle, and he's come back from the cryogenics lab, and here's that head. He's telling all this stuff, but he can't actually articulate all that stuff because there's nothing to get all the information from. It'd be just babble and gabble of anything that he might have done previously. So this means that you will only do a lot where you've had a resolution, go back on that. It's a bit like saying all the good times in your life where you've been able to articulate and you had a really good outcome of some process that you did and it worked. It was magic. You got the end result you needed, which means that in a lot of cases, you'll try and do that over and over and over again. But these few sets of formulas don't fit everything. Yeah. So as we get down and we go through everybody, all these barcodes that I've been talking about, as we get to the end of them, then all of a sudden something quite miraculously happens. And I say to people, okay, you're used to a really busy head. And they say, yeah, it's really busy. I said, does it get a lot done? Not really. I said, how quiet are you now? And they get a shock. It's incredibly quiet. I said, it's strange that once you start to hear yourself, there's not a lot going on because you're not used to, in a way, you're used to processing all this information that has never had a real resolution in you to start with. So once we discount that, then we learn how to use all the different types of energies and consciousness that we have. Then all of a sudden, the information begins to compile all these different types of everyday consciousness. Because if we look through people who've had a lot of burnout, their everyday consciousness is all split up. So they only get sort of segments of everyday consciousness, and a lot of their subconscious is turned off. But they have all these layers and layers and layers scattered in between in lots and lots and lots of different ways. So wherever there is unconsciousness, it's also information that can't be reached because there's absolutely no energy in that consciousness for it to be able to facilitate any type of an answer, which means it can't contribute to you can't figure out the right receptors to use, but it also means you cannot process in lots of different areas. And we have so many different parts of life where we've got to be able to figure out all these different analytics, that we need to be able to use. So the more we use, it's like we start off with saying, well, this is where we experience where it's like we're not just existing, that's where we feel where we're actually living in a way. That part's good. All the other parts are crap, and that's where we feel we're only existing in life. Yep. Which means that there's really no joy in that life because you're not getting the reactions, you're not getting the responses. So if it's a bit like if your partner came up and said, hi, darling, I love you, and gave you a big hug, you couldn't even sense it anyways. It'd be like hitting somebody over the head, which means that you're missing out on a heck of a lot of love. It means that you're missing out on a lot of life, but it also means that when we get to certain things, we can't actually figure out how to think in that way, if you like, because our minds aren't capable of getting the receptors and all the processes to actually work with functionality in that life. So as soon as we change that, we change the mindset so that instead of having this closed mindset, we open the mindset up, and we're starting to see that there's a lot more prospects in life because our perception is really, really wide. And then we start to notice a lot of things that are probably more joyful in life, but it also means we see life completely different. Otherwise, we do become very confined, and it's like you're only going to go out in certain things. We don't venture out to certain things because we don't feel game enough. Yeah,
So it's a kind of, that's literally narrow-minded.
it is. It is.
Yeah. And so what you're really saying is, instead of trying to fix your mind by using your mind, which is so obviously not the right thing to do, if you get your energy working really well, your mind is a part of that. Your mind will then function much better.
We
And
will.
so you're actually working at a more powerful level, which totally makes sense than trying to work on the mind with the mind, which totally doesn't make sense.
Years. I mean, this is a long time ago. It's. I was doing some experiments with a guy who's a couple of guys who are scientists, and they they were doing a lot of tests on seeing where once you quieten down, how much information they started to get. But they said, well, sometimes we can tell this is all going on, but as they said, the best, most quantifiable thing is because I can get years like before, I got this much work done in a day. And now that I started to work with you and I've done all this stuff, I'm all of a sudden like I'm not getting double the work done, but I'm getting close to it.
Yep.
Because they can actually see where they're going and you're not rehashing a lot of stuff, and you see through patterns, and you're able to find how certain information is more plausible and what's important, what's not important, how it relates, and that again is all really problem solving at the same time.
Yeah, absolutely. I see the same thing all the
Mm.
time. Just this extraordinary change in what people can get done and how much they don't have to do. Actually, that's one
No,
of the beautiful things. Is they don't actually have to do nearly as much as they thought they had to. We overcomplicate.
we do, and I know even from myself as as I found all this, and then from you've showed it loads and loads of people it, but even though I experience it every now and again, I'm blown away with how much sometimes certain situations you're not stressed, so your analytics are able to pick up what's going on more,
Yeah.
what's more
And that makes
relevant.
such a big difference. You're
It
able
does.
then to respond to situations rather than be controlled by the situation because you're effectively emotionally locked into whatever's happening.
Yeah,
Suddenly you're in a position where you're able to receive information, process information, make decisions, take action. All of that happens in a neutral space, which is where you're very free, rather than locked into an emotional drama that hooks you and holds you, and then you can't, all the rest of it doesn't function. So it's extremely more functional.
and the other way of looking at it is that you're actually available. So when you're available to process this, the availability of what is available, then it's sort of a
Yes.
double quandary there. But because you're open to the availability, then you're actually it's a matter of your energy being present, basically, because it's working. So you don't disregard what could be quite important to you, and that's
So one
pretty
of the,
important too.
I think one of the important things here is that I can imagine people saying, oh, well, then maybe I need to be more present, or I need to this, or I need to that. But it's really difficult to be present also if your energy's fragmented and it's not all
It's,
connected or it's not all working, because you have to really strain to try to experience something that's quite natural when everything's working. So it's not a question of taking the words and trying to apply the words. This is not like the way we learn things in school, where you just take the words, you regurgitate them, or you implement something, you copy the instructions and do the thing. It's really different. Like you're talking about something that needs to be done at a subtle level that creates profound shifts in our experience of life.
that's right,
And
because we're
and
not we're
and
not just being a parrot. We're not just learning, because just because you've learned blah 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 doesn't mean you can problem solve. It's just information.
yes,
So
exactly.
so once we learn both, then you can problem solve. Yeah.
So problem solving really is a multi layered
Yeah,
functionality that we have. It's not just a way of thinking, but it's the information that we receive and how we process it, and then
it
what we
is.
do with it all adds to the problem solving. Well, I think that that's actually a very useful kind of unpacking of the problem with working only on mindset,
Yeah,
and really valuable to see a more effective and more efficient way of transforming ourselves and our lives, which is what people are trying to do.
because otherwise, as soon as we and like it's like almost saying something over. I'm going to be blah blah blah, but then often you create a double quandary there because you shut yourself down because you're creating stress,
Yep, absolutely.
and it blocks you then.
Yeah, and then you get more and more shut down, and then that creates
Yeah,
more stress,
and
and it's a
it
vicious
does.
cycle.
And then it's like, why can't I do this? Why can't I do that? And then, well, we've experienced it with so many clients. You just we do the work, we find these foundations, and then all of a sudden, your mindsets open up, your
Yep.
pro your processes open up, your what is available is more open, and in the other thing is you're very flexible about your mindset, because if you're not stressed about it, your whole mindset opens up with that flexibility. But if you're stressed, your flexibility is diminished. You have almost no flexibility. So then you are only very able to process a limited amount of information all the time.
So there's a huge advantage to having your energy working well, and there's a huge disadvantage to having parts of yourself shut off, which is so obvious it barely needs to be said, except that most people don't know that they don't know what's shut down. They don't really know what's happened. They may even feel a bit shut down, but they don't know what the mechanics are. So what you're really describing here is the mechanics of that,
It
which
is,
shows that there's a way of fixing it.
and sometimes you could say it's like how you think, oh, I don't ever want to turn into my parents, but then you may feel yourself sort of regurgitating certain things that they do. But that's because your energies are very similar, which means that you're going to have a lot of the same processes. Yeah. So as you learn how to open that all up, a lot of that stuff that you did hereditarily, it's not there. It just diminishes.
It
And then
loses
we can,
power. Yeah,
yeah,
yeah. Well, that's good hope. I think good hope for for all those people who are trying to change themselves or trying to change their life. It's like
yeah,
let's get the energy working, and then it becomes so much easier. Everything else falls into place much more easily.
quite
So
easily.
thank you very much, David, for that. I think that was really
Thanks for
interesting.
letting me share this information.